What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another That's So Mets podcast stream. This week, we are joined by Wardy. You can follow and subscribe to his YouTube channel at Wardy NYM. Comes out with as much Mets content, genuinely as much as anyone. So that's where you want to be, especially this time of year, guys, right? We're just like trying to get through this lockout. It's been so much fun as Mets fans, how much action there's been going on. But thanks for joining us, dude. What's going on?
Oh, no, thank you. I really appreciate it. Yeah, no, it's funny. I know that you've interacted with a friend of mine before, my buddy Richie for Jets Media. So it was nice to actually get to unofficially meet you, Connor. Joe, really appreciate you guys having me on. Always love talking all things Mets. I think most people know that by now if you know me. So, yeah.
No doubt, man. I mean, let's be real. This is the weird time of year for us. Like everybody else has probably found this to be a boring baseball offseason, but for us, there's been, I mean, big time signings. Then even when the being the lockout, the managerial search, I think we've hit our first real snag, which is why I think Mets fans can appreciate your YouTube channel because I know you're coming up with different trade ideas or the most relevant topics. But like for you right now, like what is after that crazy rush, just what is it like trying to continue to make Mets content on a weekly basis?
It seems like it would be a lot more difficult now that we're in a lockout, but thankfully, the Mets are kind of an anomaly of a team where they had to do so much this offseason, where like hiring Buck Showalter, as we know, that's a lot of things to discuss in itself. And with more hires that are bound to happen, within the organization. And now with the news lately on Jeff McNeil from Pat Ragazzo, shout out to Pat. I mean, there's just a lot of different things to discuss. And I tried to really pre-plan things where you can really break down thoroughly a lot of different things regarding who the Mets are going to target because as we all know, they're not done this offseason, right? Whenever the lockout's lifted, whether that's right before the season or hopefully a little bit more time before that, they're going to make more moves. And those moves are going to be prominent one way or the other. So I haven't had too much difficulty. I'd be lying if I said that I didn't. I definitely did struggle today. I was going to do a video and I was like, you know what? I actually probably shouldn't do this. I feel like I'm stretching too much. I don't want to get too outlandish with things. So I'm like, all right, hold it back. And yeah, hopefully I'll have something out tomorrow. But yeah, some days are a little bit harder than others, but there's a lot that's actually going to be coming over the next month or two that I hope you guys can be a part of some of it. Very excited for that.
So obviously, like you mentioned, the content, doing everything that you're doing, what got you into wanting to do Mets content on YouTube? Because I feel like it's a field that there's not a ton out there that gets a ton of pub.
Yeah, I mean, well, simply put, to circle back a little bit on things, I started YouTube a little bit over a year. I actually want to say it was fall of 2019, I think it was. And if you watch my first videos, because I was doing all things hockey originally, because I've always been a huge sports fan, big hockey buff. New York Rangers are my team. I'm sorry if that offends you or not. I'm not
No,
sure.
you're in the right place.
Okay, well, there we go. But so I started doing that, talking all things NHL, and just with my iPhone planning me, with my wall behind me, and that did not go good to start off. But then, thankfully, I had content creators that were a lot on a higher level than me, kind of reach out to me and give me a lot of pointers. And then I reached out and obviously try to build connections and figure out how to go about things. And then after doing that for right around a year, then the whole Steve Cohen thing was kind of starting to happen. I told myself, I'm like, I love hockey, I love the Rangers and everything, but Mets have always kind of been my number one. So I was like, if the Mets get a new owner, then I'm going all in. I feel like this is the perfect time to take advantage of, new ownership, the market, the appeal. Everyone's going to be so excited. So I wouldn't be here right now if the Wilpons were still majority owner, because it would be the same thing year after year after year. It would just be beating a dead horse. And we've all suffered enough as young Mets fans. I'm not to the same level as even you guys, but I don't want to go through false promises and stuff like that. So I said, okay, if Steve Cohen becomes owner, then I'll just go all in and make a run for it because I've always been a diehard sports fan. That happened, thankfully. And, fast forward to today, that's how everything has transpired at this point, thankfully.
Yeah, it's funny. That's kind of how Joe and I started the podcast. Like we knew when the sale was really, rumored or there was a lot going on, we knew the Wilpon era was coming to an end at some point. It was like, okay, this is a good time for us. We love the Mets. Joe does a ton of work for the Mets minors for SNY, but it's like now is a good time to actually, and it's a weird field, right? Like you're one of the main guys for Mets YouTubers, possibly the main guy. I mean, your growth has been absolutely insane. We came into this like, okay, there's a lot of Mets podcasts, but people care again about this team. So like for you, what has this offseason just been like? We've been asking everyone that. It's like this felt unlike anything before where it's, it's truly, they are the storyline. Like, you turn on MLB Network, you look at all the moves, all the national writers talking about the Mets. We'll get to a point where every agent is going to need to use the Mets, but we're not even there because they're the ones actually making the moves.
Yeah, I mean that's a great question because I feel like I've asked plenty of people the same thing and they've all had kind of different takes. And mine has been, none of this really surprises me all that much, and it really just hasn't fully hit me yet. I'm until Max Scherzer, the guy on my
Totally.
mug right now, until he's actually,
Great.
picking game 2 for the Mets during the season. Like it's things like that that haven't fully processed. It kind of feels like everything's been a little bit of a fever dream. But as soon as Cone became owner, you could just sense that things were different. And even though, of course, everything humanly possible went wrong this past season, he quickly realized that. And that's why, as soon as they hired Billy Epler, I had faith in him. And I probably put a little bit more faith in him than you naturally should as a Mets fan that's normally wary of anything that they do. But I saw how Artie Moreno went about things with him. I also knew that after doing some research that Billy didn't necessarily have his hands tied to everything that the Angels did during his time as GM with them. So I was like, okay, I'm going to give him benefit of the doubt. I think that Cohen's going to put him on the right direction. We've all seen what's transpired so far. So I'm beyond ecstatic. It just kind of, I'm a little numb to it right now. I'm kind of waiting for the season to get going and all that for me to really express it, because I have already, but I don't know. I think the lockout has really put a damper on things a bit too. Like, I know that it was almost a month ago, but it feels like a year ago already for me with how everything has kind of processed to this point. It's weird to explain.
You hop on live basically all the time,
Yeah.
whenever something's happening, and then obviously all the videos you do. Talk about that 24-hour period where the Mets signed Eduardo Escobar, Mark Canha, Starling Marte, all in the same day. How'd you go about that?
Okay, well, I'm going to ask the same for you here in a second, but okay, so normally what happens is when I started the channel as well, I was like, okay, the only way for me to get, quick exposure, especially with what I want to do, is you need to be first for things, but you need to make sure that you're also right. That's something that unfortunately a lot in mainstream news and media do wrong nowadays, is they always want to be first to jump the gun on something, but a lot of times they don't actually have the facts. So I'm like, okay, as soon as something's right, I'm going to be there. I'm going to, discuss it and make it happen. So that day in particular was a bit frustrating for me, not when it comes to the Mets moves, but because it was one of those rare days where I was supposed to be out, and I was out later in the day with my brother and our friends because, simply put, my brother's getting married next year. So we're kind of talking about the people that are going to be part of, the guy side of things. So I was trying to enjoy that night. And then I was worried, however, because right before that, the Escobar news happened. So I was like, great. Then we went out and we were like 40 minutes away. And I looked at my brother. I'm like, I really, really hope nothing else happens tonight. Not that I don't want it to, but because of the fact that it's the one time I'm out. And then I get the notification on my phone about Mark Canha, and I look at him and he's like, no. And I'm like, and I was like, yeah. And then he's like, is this like important? Like, I'm like, yeah, it is important. I need to go home and talk about it right away. I'm like, this is a big deal, actually. So then flew home, did that. And then right as I was done with the Mark Canha discussion, there was a lot of things building up about Starling Marte. I didn't eat at all yet at that point of the day. So I went, got last minute McDonald's. On my drive home, I got the notification of Starling Marte. So I was like, oh, of course. So did that. It was a hectic day, but a good hectic. I can't complain looking back. It was a lot of fun. I love interacting with everyone. All Mets fans, they go berserk when news happens. So do I. It was just, again, that itself felt like kind of a fever dream. Like, it's bizarre that the Mets were able to do that much in one day, a couple hours, separate from each other. So my same question goes for you guys. What was your initial reactions, not just covering it, but as a fan, first and foremost, to see all that happen at once and kind of prove that as soon as, Billy Epler comes in now, the Mets were, chomping at the bit right away to make moves happen, but not just moves for the sake of making moves of significance before the lockout. There's no denying that they've had a better offseason than anyone else so far via free agency.
I'll start. I mean, for me, the first thing that comes to mind is like, you just don't want to go to bed when that Scherzer rumors start and everybody's in the Twitter spaces and you're following like national writers, some guys saying it's close, some guys saying that it's not. And you're just like, okay, when can I comfortably go to bed? And then am I going to wake up to the worst news or am I going to wake up to the best news? And ironically with Max, we woke up to no news. It was just like, okay, this is still going on. And it's funny you say that, like how you view it. Joe and I record our podcast on Tuesday nights, and it comes out Tuesday nights. I'm sure most people listen to it on Wednesdays. So we didn't do a podcast. Like, we don't do emergency pods anymore. We jump on here now. This is new to us, being on YouTube and Twitter streams, but like, we'll just stream when there's something urgent.
Yeah.
And there was people that tweeted us like, Wardy's done 3 videos already on the free agent side. You guys haven't done anything. And we're like, we're waiting for it all to be done, because you don't want to do one reaction and it's different for you because like your volume on YouTube is incredible. But like for us, it was like, let's bundle them all up and do an hour to an hour and a half on all these. And it was like Cano, and it's like, okay, now we're hearing Marte. And like, I had heard from, like, I don't have Mets sources, but like I had a friend that like that is reliable. That's like, it sounds like Marte is getting done tonight. And I texted Joe, and Joe's like, we'll see. 3 hours later, Marte's done. So it's like things like that. It's just crazy. Joe, what about you? I mean, we were texting nonstop, and it's like, when is it safe to just shut it down?
It was an insane day.
In the best way possible.
Yeah. I'm out on Black Friday shopping. I think I was with my friends, and one of my friends likes to wear Crocs. And I think I was in the Crocs.
Serial killer.
Yeah. Maybe.
No offense to your friend.
But he wears Crocs. I was in the Crocs store when the Eduardo Escobar news broke. And I was like, all right, cool. Like, perfectly solid move. Could play every day somewhere. That'd be nice. And then a little while later, we're out to eat. The Mark Cannon news happens, and I'm like, "Are they gonna do anything else? Like, they have to be done." And then we were hanging out because the Marte news was late, wasn't it? Like midnight or something like that.
It was past midnight. I'm pretty sure.
Past midnight, and I'm old as hell. I'm rarely up past midnight. I just happened to be that day, so it was really cool to see all that. And then, like you said, I'm texting Connor. I'm like, dude, what are we gonna do? Like, we have to get content out. And we made jokes on the next week's pod because we did a YouTube video for those 3, and then we did one for Scherzer separately because that was a couple days later. And on the podcast, we made a joke that this time, the last time we were recording the podcast, we were kind of complaining that Steven Matz spurting the Mets, and it's like, does anyone want to come to the Mets? Only 1 week later, we're like, oh, well,
everyone did.
Everyone wants to come to the Mets. It was definitely a fun and hectic weekend. And obviously with the lockout, and once the lockout ends, I'm hoping we have some more days like that, where it's like, because everything's going to have to go quick. If this lockout lasts into February, like some people think, you only have a couple of weeks between that and spring training, because you have to have spring training. I hope.
Yeah, it feels like we're going to get another rush, right? Like we started the offseason with the rush, and then the lockout, even for us, was, like I said, was fun because the Buck process and Buck being introduced. Now we're at the dead period. Like you said, there might be this really tight window between spring training, because you really can't kick that can down the road the way it's structured and the way how long the season is, where you're like, everybody might be sprinting again. And it was like, and Wardy, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. Like, it was kind of cool to see the Mets dictate the market for once. It was just like, it was not like, you could tell that they were negotiating. They didn't do anything like wildly stupid. Like, they didn't give Starling Marte 6 years, like something like that. But it felt like they split it up clearly. There was things Epler handled, things Cohen was really involved on, but they came out and moved the market themselves rather than waited for everyone else to do things and then react, which is the most un-Mets thing ever in our lifetime.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think the most surreal part of it all for me personally was, I had this vision that everything was going to transpire in the sense of, Steve Cohen is going to come in and things are going to drastically change. And they have in a lot of ways, but still a lot of things need to be done. When you go into an offseason and you have to literally address not just present baseball operations and a GM, but also your entire coaching staff everywhere on the roster, known to man, like a lot's changing. So to think that you could get the majority of it done in one offseason, you would never think that. But the Mets have already done a great job addressing all these things. So to see them all do all these moves pre-lockout and really, move the market, as you say, showed me that, wow, it was nice to see them kind of do their best Yankees or Dodgers impression. Like, this is our time. And this is something that opposing fans are going to quickly realize, if they haven't already, that, like, yes, the Mets are in the same market as the Yankees. And yes, the Mets have more money to work with than the Yankees do. And normally you don't even think that's even a possibility, but times are changing. People are going to continue going with the LOL Mets narrative all they want until obviously the Mets get on a winning structure for years and years on end. But there's no denying that, one, the money is there from Steve Cohen, but two, how they're operating, the moves that they're making now, and also how they're building the culture in the front office. It's a complete 180 than just what it was a year ago. So yeah, simply put, with how everything has happened in a short time, to take advantage of the market, but say, hey, we're going to just go all in. or even Max Scherzer, the Dodgers and the Angels, and I think the Giants, they weren't even remotely close, apparently, to the deal that the Mets gave Scherzer. And the Mets kind of amplified it for the sole purpose of saying that, yeah, we can. Like, just because we can. Like, we would have outbid anyone regardless, but we even went maybe a couple more mil still because we can. I just, knowing that you can do something like that is insane. It really is.
Talking about big money, Buck Showalter is going to be they haven't put out the, contract or anything, but reportedly he's going to be the highest paid manager in Mets history.
Yes, he is.
So it's more money being spent, and it's a definitely a good thing to see. What were your thoughts about Espada, Quatraro, and obviously Buck Showalter, who ended up getting the job? Kind of what was your preference, and what were your thoughts after, finally hearing from Buck?
I think you and I had a similar stance, probably same thing with Connor, where I wasn't against Buck, but he wasn't my initial favorite, at least. And that was with me not having nearly as much knowledge about him. So what I did was, especially with coming to a quicker realization that, okay, Buck might actually be the route that they go down, I did a lot more homework on him. And that's where I kind of got swayed into thinking that he was originally anti-analytics, to realizing that no, he's not. He just, one, hasn't had the funding that he openly said himself in every presser that he had when he was introduced during his time with Baltimore, but also just on how his career direction has been. It was a lot different than what you normally expect if you just look at his managerial record and see him just above 500. That's what a lot of fans did. And, naturally, that's what people do when they don't know about someone. They just look up quick stats and say, hey, that's how we're going to evaluate them. But Joe Espada and Quatraro, I liked a lot. And I think that they are great minds and are going to do great as a manager someday. My only concern really with Quatraro, if anything, was that he's only worked in small markets. So how was he going to be able to adapt to New York, right? He had success as an assistant hitting coach with Cleveland, with Lindor for his first couple of years, and then he transitioned into bench coach for the Rays, done really well. And when you're behind Francona and Cash, that's great company to learn from, but to still be in those small markets, heavily analytics driven, to go to the Mets that are analytics driven now, but it's very fresh, it's very new, and being in the biggest market in the world for not just the sport, but for everything, quite frankly, that's quite the transition. I felt that the Mets probably didn't want to go down that route. Espada, I thought, made plenty sense, but at the same time, it feels like there has to be maybe something lingering to this point as to why Espada hasn't gotten a role. He's tried for every managerial opening since like 2018, since he first became bench coach of the Astros. So my assumption is that maybe there's just something there that has made teams either not get to the selling point with him, or that they've at least did separate hires. And if you look at what's transpired with other clubs, they haven't really, none of them have had success other than the Giants with getting Gabe Kapler, who's the manager of the year. So you can't blame them on that decision. But outside of that, the Joe Maddons, that was Artie Moreno's decision with the Angels. When you look at the Cubs staying in-house, you look at the Texas Rangers as well, nothing drastic there. So I don't know exactly the reasoning behind someone like him, but I think he's going to have a great future. I would love him as bench coach for the Mets. I really want the Mets to hire someone potentially as their long-term fit to learn from Buck, so that way you have an easy transition versus, say, doing a big search all over again. But yeah, that was just my overall take on everything. I liked all of them. I was definitely more in favor of Espada and Quatraro, but once I learned more about Buck, and once all of the concerns that us fans had about him, say, being anti-analytics and things like that were put to the door by himself, I was more than happy and comfortable to see what he's going to bring to this team.
What's the move you want to see the Mets make when the lockout ends? I know you've discussed the potential of trading McNeil, and you made a great point, is like, don't just trade McNeil, like find a way to build a blockbuster if you're going to trade McNeil. But what do you think this team needs, and what do you think is realistic for them?
I honestly think what is realistic for them is probably not train Jeff McNeil. Not the fact that let me put it this way. Jeff McNeil, I like a lot, like really do. I don't want to see him go.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I also realize that if it does happen, there's probably a good chance why it was leaked already the way it was. Naturally, these kind of reports don't happen unless there's some type of incentive behind it, right? So I think that there is a solid chance it gets parted with, but assuming that maybe that's going to be a little bit more difficult because you're looking for something of substance, I really want the Mets to go out and get Chris Bryant. And I've been an advocate for that for a while. And the biggest concern with him, outside of him being, a little bit below average defensively, which I think, kick that at the door, because when you play 5 positions in one season, naturally, you're not going to be a Gold Glove at every position. So that's something that I'm not too concerned with. Versatility is what I love most about him. Also, the fact that if the Mets can get him on a deal less than 5 years potentially, because I'm assuming that Javi Baez going 6 was a big selling point as to why the Mets just didn't feel comfortable there. But if they can get him in a spot, maybe take advantage of post-lockout where you have a short period of time, make deals, throw him high AAV for maybe 3-4 years. Maybe you have a opt-out after a couple of years or something, because maybe you don't want to maybe you don't know how you want to utilize him, because even though I will say you can have him at third, then once Brett Beatty's ready, you can have him in the corner outfields potentially. Cano is not going to be here a long time, assumably, and Starling Marte should be here for a bit, but you can even use Chris in the corner outfield, and I think it'd be fine. So as long as you don't go long-term, I'm all in favor of Brian. I think he's probably one of, if not the most realistic thing we could see with the Mets and Billy Epler, adopting this belief that we're going to build through the market, right? Because the only way for them to get to that Dodgers, that Yankees level, what do year after year? They buy big in free agency, but they also don't give up their top prospects until they're in a spot where they can afford it. The Yankees, look at what they did at the trade deadline, getting Gallo. They gave up a lot of pieces, but none of them were really, certainties for them. And that was fine to give up a chunk of like middle B, even some C level prospects. Same thing even with the Dodgers, who gave up their top prospects for Scherzer and Turner. Like, they're still able to handle that just fine, because one, they're in a win now stage, but two, their prospect pool is just so deep. So the Mets aren't there yet, and that's why I think that they're still going to probably prioritize free agency more than anything. But yeah, Chris Bryant is still very much towards the top of my list, and mainly because of his versatility.
If the Mets are going to sign Chris Bryant, I think that probably would seemingly have to mean the end of Jeff McNeil, right? Because Eduardo Escobar would probably have to shift over to second base. Bryant would play third base.
Till someone gets hurt in May, Joe.
But I mean, we have this conversation. Like, we made a joke that last spring we were like, the Mets are so deep at pitching. They got Joey Lucchesi, they got Jordan Yamamoto. Like, they're going to be just fine. And it turned out that they didn't have near enough depth. But when you talk about potentially trading McNeil, so if they go and they sign Bryant, which I 100% agree with you, that if it's a shorter term deal, throw in the opt out, that's the deal for Chris Bryant. If he's going to go get 5, 6, 7 years somewhere, then good luck. Go enjoy yourself there. You obviously had that video with all the blockbuster trades. If you were to trade Jeff McNeil, what would be your realistic, obviously ideal return? Is it Luis Castillo? Is it a deal with the A's where you're getting a pitcher and a Matt Chapman maybe for that bat?
I think A's are the most ideal fit. I would love Luis Castillo just as much as anyone, but something that I emphasized in my video was that, even though that these are possibilities, it doesn't necessarily mean that I wholeheartedly agree with them or see them happening. They can, but the Reds are just such a pesky team to try to deal with, because they're always Jekyll and Hyde, it feels like, with Castillo and his availability. They'll say like early in the offseason, oh, he's available. Then you hear reports saying that now he's not. Like, they've been doing that for at least a full year now, because I know the Mets showed some level of interest in him last offseason. So I would love Castillo. I mean, if you can go all in for an ace, there's no one better than him that's available either in the free agent or trade market. Like that itself would carry the Mets, I fully believe, to a deep playoff run. That's a team where even if you sacrifice less offensive production, what you have in those three aces, you could potentially even have JD Davis as your fifth starter and you're still going to be fine. Like, that's how deep your rotation is at that point. But the A's just make the most sense to me, because they just have so many guys that we believe are available. As long as you can get, Billy Bean, forced everyone on board that they are going to start selling. Part of me honestly hopes that Matt Olson gets traded, even if it is to the Yankees, because that tells you that, okay, that they're going all in. They're getting rid of these guys that are due for big arbitration years and stuff like that. So I think Shamanai or Chris Bassett is as close to a perfect fit for what the Mets are looking for. And then if they want to get Chapman as well, I say absolutely go for it. But a lot of people are underestimating Chapman after having a 210 average, but he just came off of a significant hip surgery. He actually, a fun fact, a lot of people don't know this, Mark Cano was, I think, in the top 5 or 6 in all the AL in 2021 with pitches per plate appearance. But number 1 was Matt Chapman. So even though he had that low average, he was seeing a lot of pitches, just getting really unlucky. And I think he would bode well in a park like Safefield, even though, yes, I know it isn't so hitter friendly. But I think Chapman, his defense, what he brings, and on a 2-year deal, what his contract currently is, that's perfect, because then the Mets can figure, okay, we'll have him either short term, or if we want to have him stay till his mid-30s, then you can get creative with Brett Beatty. Maybe you toy with him in the corner outfields. Maybe you utilize someone else as a DH. It's a good problem to have. Let me put it that way. And I think that the A's just have the necessary players for what the Mets want right now without giving up the entire farm.
God, a left side of the infield with Chapman and Lindor would
So
be
nice.
really insane. That is a name that I think people don't talk about enough in terms of the Mets. That would be really interesting. All right, a question from Scott here. So does the lack of lefty starting pitching concern outside of Peterson? Does that concern you? I mean, this is something that I don't really get worked up about anymore, but do you look at this as an issue for this team right now? More in the bullpen for me is where I would think. And I know Joe's mentioned that a lot.
Yeah, bullpen 100%. I mean, you have to replace Aaron Loop, right?
Yeah.
And that's why like Andrew Chafin's like my favorite option.
I'm with you
for
all the
agency.
way.
Yeah, we're all on that same board. Or if trade, even though I don't think trade's as realistic, someone like Taylor Rogers, who I know the Mets have had some level of interest in from the Twins. But pitching wise, I do think it's important to have at least one lefty in there. Maybe it's not going to change too much for you. I know it's different than what it was years ago, but there's something that about just having that X factor, especially in the middle of your rotation, to change things up a bit. Especially if say you have a series of at least 3 or 4 games, like that lefty might not seem like it does a lot, but especially depending on what type of matchups you have. If you are facing a lineup that's awfully lefty heavy, we know there's plenty of lefty batters in the league. Like that really could benefit the Mets. So I don't see it as much as a negative as I do positive. Can they live without a lefty? Absolutely. But I think it does more good things than harm if they would kind of prioritize that a little bit more than they would just going for whatever righty's available.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that at all. But it, like you said, it has to be the right guy. Like I'd rather trade for Frankie Montas or Chris Bassett than sign Yusei Kikuchi or Carlos Rodon, even just because those guys are lefties. I don't want to add a lefty just because I feel like I have to have a lefty in my
That's
rotation.
fair.
But if a guy like Sean Manaea is coming over, it's like, all right, that's a good combination of this is a good pitcher, and he happens to throw from the left side. But as far as kind of when he mentions Peterson, the first thing that springs to my mind is starting pitching depth. What are some arms that you could think of that you'd like to see them add? Maybe lower end free agents, or because you've talked about basically everything on your channel. Who's someone that you could see as maybe some starting pitching depth options?
Depth options, that's where I think Kikuchi makes more sense. I don't see him as a middle of the rotation starter, but I do see him as someone that had a really strong first half, had a poor second half. Mets know that very well with Taijuan Walker, so it's not like they're unfamiliar with it. And I think Kikuchi, he has actually some really sneaky, nice stuff that would bode the Mets well. Really in a scenario where like a Steven Matz in previous years, where you don't necessarily know how comfortable you are with him yet. Matz would be, like say the number 5 at times, but I think Kikuchi is someone that would give you more stability depth wise. I honestly would trust him far more than I would David Pearson right now. And this isn't a slight on David in the slightest, but it's the fact that David has such little experience at this point. Kikuchi's been in the league for a couple of years. He's, at this point, I feel he's mature enough where if he gets Jeremy Hefner to work with him, I think he can help with his control a little bit. He has a really nice wipeout slider, I believe, has some nice off-speed stuff. So I like Kikuchi. There's some other depth options too. My favorite was John Gray. I know that I think, Joe, you were pretty high on him as well.
Joe loves John Gray. It's like his favorite player in the league.
It's what's it, white whale? My
white whale.
My white whale for like the number 3
Moby Dick
in a rotation. I will always want John Gray, but we could get Sonny Gray, and it'll be close enough.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Yeah, that would be. Oh my God, don't get me started on Sonny Gray. Not that I'm against him, but I know Mets fans, just him and New York in general. But yeah, I do think that John Gray would have been very ideal. I had a stream preset in case the Mets signed him and like a Photoshop of him in a Mets outfit, so I was ready. Didn't happen, unfortunately. That usually happens when I prep stuff.
And they got Scherzer. I think they did okay.
Yeah, they did okay for the most part, right? But yeah, depth wise, I would say Kikuchi just makes sense for them. As long as if you can avoid maybe going 3 years with him, or maybe you have an opt out after 2, that's fine. There's some other options as well in free agency, but I even feel like depth pitching wise, the Mets have multiple depth guys. I don't think depth is their concern right now. I think their concern is having another full-fledged starter, right? Because I think a guy like Tyler McGill as well is going to surprise some people next season, should he be given more opportunity. But with saying that, I don't necessarily want to see him starting this rotation either in 2022. I want certainties. I don't want guys that have just had a cup of tea so far. I think the Mets feel the same way.
I'm being an optimist here, but I really think Cookie Carrasco is going to surprise some people this year.
Okay.
And everybody's just completely written him off. And understandably, it was a complete dud last year. I don't think he was ever right physically.
He wasn't.
It felt like setback after setback, and then you throw him on the mound. The plan for him to be out there was terrible. That's not how you bring back a starting pitcher. I understand they were desperate. There's no denying that, but I don't think Carrasco is going to be like the number 3 or have like the effect Stroman has had on the team last year. But man, if Carrasco could be a solid number 4, it probably changes everything for this rotation.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. I think it's easy to forget how good Cookie is just because obviously he went through a lot these past couple of years, coming back, battling cancer, beating it, which is just an insane story in itself. But, for him to be hurt like all year long, I didn't like how the Mets went about it too. There was a desperation factor with them still trying to push for playoffs that just, unfortunately, as we know, fell short. And then with him getting surgery again this offseason, that's my biggest concern for him. That's in his mid-30s now. He has yet to have a normal offseason with the Mets. This is another offseason where he's not having it normal. I don't know exactly how long his rehab is from his surgery again, but I think that's just another factor into why you need to operate with the belief that he may give you little to no production at all next season.
Yeah,
not that he won't, but same deal with Noah Syndergaard. I was saying it all along, like prior to him going to the Angels, I was saying that I hope that Noah has great impact, but the Mets would have to be downright foolish to operate in the situation where they're actually betting on him. That's the Bray Van Wagenen era. That should not be the Cohen era for a team that's supposedly trying to, go all in 2022. And so far, they've proven that, but they have more work to do.
Another couple names that are being talked about as potential trade candidates are Dom Smith, JD Davis. Where do you stand on them? Do you see a fit with them on the 2022 Mets, or do you think they should be looking post-lockout to move them to either address bullpen, starting pitching, or whatever?
See, both of them I feel can profile pretty well as a DH, but the biggest issue is Robinson Cano. What are they going to do with him, right? So I've had a gut feeling all along. I don't think Cano is going to be on this roster. That's my hot take. I think that something happens that they're either able to just eat his contract, that Cohen doesn't want to even take the potential risk with him, knowing that he has little ability in the infield at this point, right? And how much pop are you going to get from his bat at DH? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. And I don't know how he's going to even resonate with the clubhouse now after coming back from not his first, but second PED suspension. So it's things like that. But JD's like the perfect DH profile. And I'm not someone that necessarily wants to give up on him too soon, because in that role in itself, I think he's great. But outside of that, there's nowhere to put him, right? He doesn't have the glove, unfortunately. And he does have a strong bat who dealt with a lot of injuries last year. But you can kind of get the feeling, he said it, he feels he's not coming back. I don't think the Mets are bringing him back either. I think that he goes in hand with the whole culture change as a whole, because we have to realize that, yes, the Mets want to bring back some of these players, but they didn't go out of their way to do it this offseason, which tells you that it's more than just talent alone, performance, and doing player evaluation. I think if Billy Epler was still here, that Javi Baez and maybe Marcus Stroman would still be Mets. But clearly he's had a different outlook on things. I think the Mets have too because of that. And I think JD kind of finds himself falling in that category. And Dom's a big wild card. He's another guy that just doesn't have any ability because Pete's locking down first base. So again, if you don't have really room for him at DH, yes, you could potentially have them off the bench, but knowing that they can't really even be a late game replacement, how many times are you going to see that with Pete down the stretch in a game when the Mets are probably going to be in a bunch of close games per usual? I just don't see it as ideal. And these are guys that do still have value because they have control on their contracts. So I think the Mets can get very creative and part with quite literally all of them. But I would advocate is that if you're going to do that, try to do it all in one to really get the most enhanced return possible. If you just do one by one with guys that had down years for different reasons, you're not going to get nearly as much as what you could if you just package them all together and you say, wow, these are a lot of guys that have proven to be good hitters in the past, that had a down year, but also are young and have multiple years of control on their contract. That's something that I would be interested in, says multiple teams. I don't know exactly who those teams are, though.
Well, yeah, individually, it's selling low. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, quickly before you hit what you want to say next. You mentioned Oakland and, potentially trading Matt Olson to the Yankees or somewhere else. Boom. Sounds like a Dom Smith destination to me.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one.
Under team control. But the thing is, like, just selling low on them. The fact that all three of them did not have good years and a lot of it is injury related. I'm with you, Wardy, that it totally changes the game if you could package at least two of them out of the three. But before we get out of here, I want to ask you what you got coming up and remind everyone once again to subscribe to your YouTube channel if they're not. I'm sure everybody in here already has, but Wardy NYM. What do you got coming up as we get through these dark days of the lockout?
I mean, I don't know. I thought I had something
day by day. Oh, you're a day by day kind of guy.
I'm very much a day by day kind of guy. I have a bunch of topics on my phone that I think about, but then a lot of times when I prep things, then news comes out or something that's just worthy to discuss, then I'm like, all right, we'll push that aside for like a week. But yeah, I don't know. All I can say is that there's a lot of content still coming out. Hopefully at least one more this week, and then plenty next week. Expect me to reach out to you guys soon too, because I have a topic that I think you guys are really going to enjoy to come on the channel and discuss. So a lot of different things, a lot more, top 5, top 10 rankings, a list of different types of subjects. But yeah, a lot going on. Just can't necessarily tell you exactly what yet. You'll have to wait and see. But I really appreciate you guys having me on. Been loving the podcast. Been a big fan for a while now, especially when I started. I've been listening to you guys literally forever. And then when I started to build a friendship with Joe, obviously that just continued. So it was great to meet you, Connor, as well. I'm wishing you guys continued success. Please, 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 if you're watching this, guys, help get them to 1,000 subscribers. They're going to get there real soon. But hope you guys have a very happy new year. Thank you guys again so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
One last thing for you, Wardy, before we go.
Sure.
What's your advice for us to continue to grow this YouTube channel? Because obviously, like you said, you started when Steve Cohen bought the teams. You haven't been doing this for 5 years or something, and you've made a meteoric rise in basically 12 months. What would be your advice to us?
Okay. All right. We'll do like a 5-point list, right? 1, make sure you're consistent. Even if you don't have a lot of things to discuss, just make sure you're there. People love interaction, especially in live streams or normal videos too. People love that kind of stuff. As long as you're consistent, that's going to help with the YouTube algorithm. 2, put yourself in a situation where even if you're not, say, in love with doing the breaking news type things, because I know that, there's a very small niche for that. I jump on that because it's just something that people have, built a following with me for doing so. But I know that they're definitely dragging. I have to operate like my entire life based on news during the off season. That's not an easy thing for people that have normal day jobs to do. This is my job. So that's why I make it a priority. But what I would suggest for you guys too is, continue obviously having more people to come on to collaborate. I think that's a great thing. And also just continue to fine tune little things. If you get to the point where you can add, obviously a little bit more graphics, add some player highlights, like simple stuff, a little things go a very long way. And the biggest thing that I see most content creators having issues, even podcasters, is that they get complacent where they're at, they're comfy. And then that's how you unfortunately get lost in the algorithm. You got to do stuff time by time to kind of one up yourself a little bit, even if it's not a lot. It'll make a drastic difference. And I've learned that rather quickly since starting YouTube. And yeah, those are definitely the points that I would give to you guys is be consistent, be genuine with what you're doing. Don't be clickbaity at all. Try to avoid that. You can discuss things that maybe are a little far-fetched, but actually have realism. Because as soon as you lose credibility with things, there's just no going back. There's always going to be people that pinpoint you at that. And just make sure that you guys are showing how diehard of a fan you are, first and foremost. People appreciate that when they can relate to you. And I'm just a fan. That's the reason why I'm talking to you guys right now, for just being a fan, nothing more.
That's awesome, man. Good stuff all around. I think all of our comment section will appreciate that. It's a good time to remind everyone, every Thursday at 4:30, Joe and I will be on our YouTube channel. So we're following Wardys Advice. We need all the help we can get. Thanks so much, dude. Thanks everyone that tuned in, and we'll be back next week.